back in session, and we have 3 more housing sites to consider this afternoon. Just to say 2 things really. One, that the note on C2 housing involving a conversation between Barton Wilmore and Tim Burden from wherever he's from, Turley, and the council, either in the form of a note or SCG, Statement of Common Ground.
Yes.
Once that comes forward and is submitted, then I will allow a week for everybody else to make comments on that. Secondly, Richard Barnby was cut off this morning, apparently just as he was getting through to us. I don't know if Richard Barnby is still with us. If he is, and he wanted to say something briefly on this morning's matters, I will take it for a few minutes if he wants to. Are you with us, Mr. Barnby?
I think sadly it seems like he must still be having issues because he hasn't rejoined. So
Right. Have to force himself to have a nice time in Italy then. And then we come on to SA 18, which is former East Grinstead Police Station, College Lane, East Grinstead, for 22 dwellings. And the only comment I've got on this one is from the council. And the council say that it's got existing safe and secure access, no significant infrastructure requirements, no showstoppers, no living conditions issues identified at this stage. It's got a parkland setting there too, which will be reflected in the future developments. And obviously East Grinstead is a Category 1 settlement. Some land stability work apparently is needed. Is there anything that the council or any of the parties wish to add to that?
Nothing from us, sir. We're not aware of anybody taking, or at least wanting to take issue with it, who's participating today. I mean, obviously, if you have questions, we'll do our best to answer them, but I've got nothing to add, no.
Well, that's amazing. Caught up some ground already. So SA 26 is the next one. Get that one up on my plans. So land south of Hammerwood Road, Ashurst Wood. From memory, a site that was entirely full of trees, I think. And difficult to see much into the site, apart from trying to look over a wall. So looking at that one, what comments have I got from people? Right, for 12 dwellings, site owner intends to develop the site in the next financial year. It's got 2 main access points, no conflict with national policy, no showstoppers, no significant amenity issues. It's within the High Weald AONB, but it's also within an urban area. And the council state that the site would have a low impact on the landscape with no heritage issues. Andrew Black states it's inappropriate to allocate this site for development without a thorough appraisal of reasonable alternatives, and presuming that's said because it's within the AONB. Again, has the council got anything to say? If not, I'll ask Andrew Black to come in.
Nothing more from us, sir, at the moment. I'll reply if I need to, but at present, no, thank you.
Right, Tim North, I notice you've got something to say, so do come in, please.
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me, sir?
I can hear
Sorry.
you.
Yep, sorry. Yes, thank you, sir. We did raise representations on this site. Should I first of all say my name is Tim North Associates Limited, and I'm representing Dukesfield Properties Limited, who find this site unsound. We did raise representations, I said, sir, to the Regulation 19 version of this local plan. So this is a site which is something of an anomaly. And when I mean that, sir, it's a site which is unlike the other 21 allocated sites. It is not contiguous with the settlement boundary of Ashurst Wood. That's an issue, sir, which the local planning authority accept in paragraph 5.2 of a document which was produced in August 2020 entitled the Built Up Area Boundary Review and Policies Map Topic Paper. Rather long title, but that is it. In that document at 5.2, it says this, as set out under phase 1A, criterion 1, the built up area has also been amended to accommodate any housing allocation which is located outside and adjacent to the current BUA boundary. In the case of the housing allocation SA26, land south of Hammerwood Road, however, the site is not contiguous with the settlement of Ashurst Wood, although it is well related to the settlement. And this, sir, is the important point. It is separated by Hammerwood Road and is part of a distinctly different character from the main settlement of Ashurst Wood. Now, pausing there, sir, that description of being a distinctly different character from the main settlement of Ashurst Wood is not in itself so dissimilar to what was said over 35 years ago when this site was last looked at for release for development as part of the East Grinstead Worth local plan. So I haven't seen a copy of that, the report from the inspector on that document, but if you wish to have it, then I'm quite happy to send you a copy of the relevant extract to the programme officer if that is felt necessary. But in that document, sir, at paragraph 20.13, when the site was last looked at 35 years ago, it said this: the boundary of the built-up area of Ashurst Wood has accordingly been drawn along Hammerwood Road because there was a clear change in the character between the residential areas to the north of the road and the rural character of the open countryside to the south, which included the objection site. And that, sir, hasn't changed one iota as far as the council is concerned, as far as I'm concerned as well. He went on to say to include the objection site in the built-up area would lead in due course to a marked change in its character, which was entirely that of the countryside. Next paragraph says the village of Ashurst Wood lay within the High Weald AOMB, which was designated in 1980, confirmed in 1983. Development on the objection site would have an adverse effect on views from a distance towards the village, where the site was in an elevated south-facing position. That was the view then, so going back to what was said in 5.2, because I paused halfway through that paragraph of the document entitled Built Up Area Boundary Review and Policies Map Topic Paper. It goes on to say, the size of the site was reduced in size following the Regulation 18 consultation, resulting in the development being more closely associated with the existing development of Newhurst Close to the east and the wider settlement area beyond, focused around Cansiron Lane, which is also outside the built-up area boundary. In accordance, therefore, with Phase 1B criteria regarding sporadic development on the edge of settlements, it does not make logical sense to extend the built-up area boundary around this allocation. So there's no built-up area boundary around this allocation. It is said to be distinctly different from the main character settlement and is part of the countryside, sir. But that's my starting point on this. The situation is, sir, that it could be said, and I understand this proposition, that Newhurst Close was not in existence at the time of the East Worth local plan. That is factually correct. But the development of Ewhurst Closer was an exception site, an affordable housing site, promoted by English Rural Housing Association on part of the land which previously was the tennis courts associated with the Ashurst Wood Abbey School before it was converted into residential accommodation. On the application relating to that development for 12 affordable units that took place in 2011, the design and access statement talks about enclosing the site to soften its impact within the landscape and to provide a street frontage and access road and to ensure the long-term retention of existing trees. Now, I think you alluded to this, sir, in your opening. If you take any photographic survey of this area, any aerial photographs, and there is one, sir, in the LVIA prepared by Land Vision relating to SA26. I think it's at page 90. You'll see this is a block of woodland, a complete block of woodland. The site is situated, and characteristically so, as part of the well-wooded rural landscape on the high-wheeled forest ridge. It's a post-medieval modified landscape in parkland style planting. It's located on a plateau on this ridge, with the land to the south beyond this allocation steeply sloping. That's the starting point of this particular development, sir. The fact is that I can't see, unless I am mistaken, any analysis given of the health or vigor of any of the trees on this site. And if we are looking to retain trees on the boundary, as I see is promoted in the master plan approach produced by the architects, then the first thing I would have thought you need to do, sir, is to assess whether these trees are going to remain, because there has been no assessment of any trees on this site at all, from what I see from the recorded information. If I'm wrong on that, then obviously I will be pointed to that as much as you will be, sir, to the description or to the various arboricultural report. So that it doesn't just stop at trees, I'm afraid to say. The LVIA, in my view, is a generic document. The proposed master plan is not, in my view, sympathetic or even imaginative in terms of layout. It fails, in my view, to reflect the high-wheeled design guide, and there is no indication of whether the indicative positions of houses on this site affect trees at all. So from a tree point of view, sir, there is no report before you whereby you can say, well, there will be the retention of trees on the boundary or within the site at all. But that doesn't stop there, sir. The important point about this site is also to do with ecology. And you will know, sir, from the Regulation 18 version of the plan, that there was an objection raised to this site by none other than Natural England. And Miss Conybeare from that organisation, sir, had the following to say. She said, this is a priority habitat deciduous woodland. Is present on part of this site, which is not referred to in SA 26. The priority habitat should be protected as far as possible, in line with the MPPF, paragraph 174, which states that plans should promote the conservation, restoration and enhancement of priority habitats, ecological networks, and the protection and recovery of priority species, and identify and pursue opportunities for securing measurable net gains for biodiversity. The representation went on to say that the removal of this habitat would be contrary to District Plan Policy DP 37. The priority habitat should be protected as far as possible with provision of measurable biodiversity net gain. And as is the case with trees, I can find no report that's been produced on this site relating to biodiversity. There is no ecology assessment whatsoever undertaken on this site. And as I say before, this is a Section 41 site in accordance with the Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act 2006. It is a habitat of principal importance, and yet there is no information before you, sir, which assesses the impact of releasing this site for residential development on ecological issues. Now, that, sir, and I'll come back to this when, if I may, to assess the response from the council to SA 26 as part of their document MSDC 02C little 2. Looked at all those sites, you recall, sir, in accordance with the issues you raised in para 3.3 of matter 3, and I would like to go back to that. But sir, apart from the fact that there is no ecological assessment on this site, and apart from the fact it is situated on the High Weald Forest Ridge, there is also no assessment of potential contamination of this site, a matter which is recognised by the District Council in the site allocation, site selection paper 3, relating to this site. Now that may be difficult, sir, on the basis that how do you assess sites which you do not know the disposition of units on it or even the numbers. So we are looking at a site in Ashurst Wood, and the fact of the matter is you can, albeit with difficulty, assess the impact of contamination. And here I'm talking about the prospects of providing affordable housing. I'm talking about the viability of the site from a publication produced by HCA, which I'm afraid to say is the most recent one, in March 2015, entitled Guidance on Dereliction, Demolition and Remediation Costs. I'm afraid to say there's been no further evidence, no further research done on this issue relating to an update of that document. But what it does show, that document, even if you assume a low sensitivity and low potential in terms of contamination, you're talking of between £50,000 and £205,000, depending on the results. I would have thought that's equally important, which has to be assessed alongside the tree survey, arboricultural report, alongside the habitats or ecological assessment of the site at the same time. To add to these problems, sir, this site was in 14 metres of of important minerals in the form of brown clay. I can find no assessment of the impact of this development on that mineral resource. It is not talked about, although it is, to be fair to the authority, mentioned in their site selection paper 3 when it comes to look at this particular site. And to that extent, there are a number of issues which I think need to be examined. So going back to the point which I raised earlier, and that is the document produced by the authority, MSDC02C, in relation to this site, and the points which you have asked in your MIQs. The first point is the willingness of the owner to implement their sites on the basis of relevant policy. Unlike the sites which were talked about this morning, this has not been the subject of discussion, as I understand it, with the authority, with a potential developer on mind. The response is that the site owner remains committed to develop this site with the intention to complete the site within the next financial year. What is not mentioned, sir, is that the Eichner family is made up of 4 individuals. 2 of those individuals, Mr. Jason Eichner and Mr. Daniel Eichner, have raised representations to the Regulation 19 version of this plan, objecting to the allocation of SA 26 and its release for residential development. Mr. Jason Eichner states SA 26 of the Site Allocations DPD is, in my mind, entirely ill-conceived and harmful, both the character of Ashurst Wood and the region in which the development is proposed. I'll just pause there. Mr. Daniel Eichner says the site is in an area of beautiful woodland and should not be developed, especially when there are more suitable brownfield and ex-industrial sites nearby. The latter, so is a point which I'll be raising on Monday about previously developed land in industrial use. And I again can find no report which has looked at any of those sites. And I think that is a serious omission with respect to sites in Ashurst Wood and throughout the district, having implications on SA. But I don't want to talk about that now because it's not relevant to this particular point. So the second point you raise is safe and secure access. Can that be provided within the ownership? And the response from Mid Sussex District Council says safe and secure access can be achieved from 2 access points for the proposed allocation within the ownership of the allocated site. When I looked at the sites for that is the master plan produced by the architects, only 1 access is shown into this site. So I'm not quite sure where the second axis is and how that actually relates to the master plan that is on the council's website relating to this site, which shows only 1 access, namely through Ewhurst Close. If there is 2 accesses, then I'd like to know where that second axis is likely to be, because it will either be through the 5-metre buffer along the frontage onto Hammerwood Road, or it will be through a gap over an area of open land, which, as I understand it, has been used for recreational purposes, and to which the master plan refers to that area as a point of access into open space, albeit pedestrian. I'm talking about a pedestrian pathway linked to open space. If that access comes in from Hammerwood Road, so then of course that will have, or potentially have, depending on where it is, an impact on the trees on what is the western boundary of that site, which will not enclose the site, in much the same way as the health of trees is not known around the site. So the problem I find with this site is that there are points raised in the LVIA by Land Division, which clearly reflects the stance that I believe is being taken here by the promoters of the site. And I would just refer you to page 90 of their LVIA document, which is a photo 3. And that photograph says poor condition of some of the former parkland planting lowers the landscape quality of parts of the site to low within the site in this part of HW1. Good specimen trees will need to be protected and retained where possible, though few remain. These areas of dead and dying plant will need to be replaced by mixed native broadleaf planting. It shows a picture of the dead and dying planting. That's in the middle of the site, but you don't know, sir, because there's been no tree report as to the vigour or the health of the trees within and on the boundaries of the site. But that approach, sir, you look at picture 19, I'd ask you to do that, sir, and consider that from the point of view of not landscape, but biodiversity. It is precisely these areas that are rich in biodiversity. And it seems to me, so this is an issue which has been given scant regard in this particular allocation. So the points raised, if I might say so, by a representation raised by Elaine Eichner to the development of Ewhurst Close. And she says this, someone living in the area, someone familiar with the site. She says, firstly, in the documents associated with this application, that's the application for the 12 affordable units on the exemption site, there are 2 maps and a report from an arboricultural point of view. I feel that the wording in this report is emotive and misleading. For example, the report claims that the site is derelict. I don't know what the technical definition of this word is when applied to a site proposed for a housing development. But if I don't know the site in question, that word would bring to mind a downtrodden, abandoned, unpleasant place, and nothing could be further from the truth. This is a beautiful parcel of land, and if the report is implying it serves no useful purpose to mankind, I would say that it is all the better for that. It's not strictly true, as I know many people who gain a great deal of pleasure from this green and wooded space, but it's also home to a great variety of wildlife. I'm sure your experts are right, and that there is no great crested newt colony or whatever. But that implies an anthropocentric viewpoint that I find is inappropriate. All life is valuable, not just the rare species that could prevent or hold up a planning application, but the badgers, foxes, rabbits, and small mammals that live there all pass through the land every night, the bats that fly above it, the birds that nest in it, the innumerable species of insects that it contains, and the trees and other plants that have been growing there for years. It is precisely because this land is not used by man that such a diverse ecosystem has become established there. And that, sir, was on a site which is adjacent to the allocated site, which at the time was for large part open because it was the tennis court to the former school. This is not an open site. This is a block of woodland which is going to be, whether we like it or not, systematically destroyed. And I say that with no emotion, sir, because on the application at Ewhurst Close, 69 trees came down. And I think there'll be at least a comparable amount on this site to ensure a satisfactory residential development. Passing on, sir, to the other points in the council's response on SA 26. Any conflict with a made neighbourhood plan? The site known as SA 26 was rejected by Ashurst Wood Parish Council at the time the Ashurst Wood neighbourhood plan was being prepared. The council has said in their response that they consider the allocation is fully evidenced and justified in Site Selection Papers 3. Site Selection Papers 3, sir, or 1 to 3, I beg your pardon, do not consider previously developed land in employment use. And there is no justification for not considering that. In fact, sir, if you look at the Site Selection Paper 3 pro formas for this site and my client's site at Ashurst, at the Ashurst Wood IVD Industrial Estate, you'll see that ours scores better than this site based on the council's answers to those pro formas, not mine. The only difference being that IVD Laundry site, sir, is an existing employment use and seems to be the main reason for not considering that site for alternative purposes, regardless of paragraph 120 of the MPPF. So any conflict with national planning policy? Well, I would say, based on the fact, as I've alluded to, no tree, no landscape, no contaminated land, no assessment of the mineral resource, that this site is would, if developed, be contrary to paragraphs 170 B and D, 174 for the reasons given by Ms. Connerbeer from Natural England in her Regulation 18 response. And I'd also say, so 174, protect and enhance biodiversity and geodiversity plans should, and they set out, as I'm sure you're aware, so two issues there. So I don't consider that this site does lead to no conflict with national planning policy. On the contrary, there are clear contrary policies in the absence of any evidence to prove otherwise. So you've referred to the fact that there's no showstoppers on this site. It is, of course, in a groundwater vulnerability zone as well, although there's no assessment done of the aquifer, which lies partly beneath the surface of this site. There are no significant impact on living conditions of neighbouring properties. I don't deny that. The significance, though, of this site's importance both to biodiversity and the high-wheeled AOMB, and the high-wheeled AOMB unit were instrumental, so I might say so, in ensuring the LVIA, but not instrumental in ensuring an ecological assessment was going on, or should take place, I beg your pardon. Contaminated land hasn't been assessed, difficult as it is, that can still be assessed. And other material considerations was, as I mentioned to you, it's within 40 metres of a mineral resource. It's also very close to a local wildlife site, Herries pasture. So all in all, sir, my view is this site is unsound. It should not be released for residential development. You do not have the requisite information, if I might say so, sir, to say that there would be no impact on trees, biodiversity, contaminated land, or mineral resources. And for those reasons, I would ask you to delete this site from the site allocations DPD for release for residential purposes. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you for that, Mr. North. Was there anything Andrew Black wished to add to that, or is he not with us?
I'm listening in, sir. Nothing else to add.
Nothing else to add. Okay, well, let's go back to the council. You've had a long list here of...
We have indeed. I'm tempted to say it is a far longer list than anything which appears from Mr. North's original consultation form representation, which is the only written documentation we have from him. We have not had a main matter statement. Although a number of the points that he has raised, to be fair to him, are flagged in his original representation, the main thrust of those was not to suggest that this is a totally hopeless allocation, but rather that his site compares favourably with this and therefore should have been allocated either as well or instead. So in circumstances where you've had, as you say, a long list of points, a number of which are new and not previously raised, and so it's a point I make not just today, but I note that Mr. North is also down to speak on Monday next week, where at the moment, as far as I'm aware, he's the only participant who's objecting to any of the matters that we're looking at on Monday, and we don't have a main matter statement from him in relation to any of that as well. But certainly as far as today is concerned, sir, I'm not in a position to answer a number of questions. Alice Henstock will deal with as many as she can, but if it's not a complete list, I'm not going to apologise for that at the moment. One of the purposes of the whole approach to this is that we should have sufficient advance notice of points that are going to be raised so that we can be prepared to respond to them. If we need to come back to you in writing on any other matters, I'm going to ask if we can have the opportunity to do that. But for the moment, I'll ask Ms. Henstock to deal with what she can deal with. So.
Well, yes, for your request on further time, that is granted if you need that. With the proviso, again, that there'll be a week's response time from anybody else.
Entirely fair, sir, and understood. Thank you.
Alice Henstock, welcome again.
Thank you. Just to cover off the main first point in relation to the built-up area boundary as defined in the East Grinstead and Worth local plan, that was adopted back, I think, in the mid-1980s. So things have changed significantly since then. And as Mr. North mentioned, the development of Ewhurst Close adjacent to this site. So that's kind of the context has moved on since the built-up area boundary was defined in the 1980s. Just to cover, Mr. North made a number of points in relation to trees. I just like to note none of the trees are protected on the site, so there's nothing stopping those trees being cleared, whether or not an allocation on this site is secured. I think most of the points are actually covered in the policy criteria that support this allocation in relation to trees, priority habitats, the minerals extraction, biodiversity, net gain. They're all points we acknowledge would need to be considered and further evidenced at planning application stage. But in terms of the principle of the allocation of this site, as you will be familiar with by now, site selection paper 3 quite clearly shows this site scores well against the criteria which we assessed all the sites in the process, and that further work is required in the detail, but that's normal at a planning application stage. And we feel that the policy criteria is very thorough in terms of the institution matters, that further evidence needs to be submitted on at that stage. I think that's all I can say at this point, but if there is any further points I've missed, we can come back at a later date.
Thank you. I'm going to move on because I've heard a lot on this site now, and I've got the details I need. I don't think there's a need for me to know anything more. And I'm going to move on to the last site of the day, and it's the one which was delayed from before at Cookfield. So we're talking about SA23. And my comments on that one, or my note of the comments that have been made. From the council, there is promotion agreement on this site, safe and secure access from Hanley Lane, no significant infrastructure requirements, no transport issues, no significant local amenity issues, local condition issues, living condition issues, sorry. No significant landscape impacts, although within the setting of the high-wheeled AONB, and no objection from the AONB unit close to facilities. Barton Wilmore for Glenby Developments, that basically the County Council has confirmed all the previous access issues have been addressed satisfactorily. The Cookfield neighbourhood plan is superseded by the district plan, which sets the framework for this plan, the site allocations plan. Flood zone 1, no showstoppers. It's not in the AONB. The site provides sufficient opportunity to sensitively locate new residential development, and that Cookfield is a sustainable location for development. Tony Forward Associates for Cookfield Parish Council state that the Parish Council seeks a deletion of policy SA23. If it remains in the plan, the southern field should be free of development and provided as public open space and transferred to the Parish Council with funds to enable future maintenance. And finally, I've got Andrew Black Consulting for Vanderbilt Homes. The site is within close proximity to the high-wheeled AONB. So those are the comments I've got. Let's bring people in now on this one. Tony Forward, would you like to start? Welcome to our proceedings. Would you like to start on this?
Thank you very much, sir. I have sought to follow your set of questions in order so that we can deal with them as briefly as we can. So firstly, the conflict with the neighbourhood plan is your first point 3. If I could just deal with the status of the neighbourhood plan. I know you've heard debates to and fro on this over the last day or so, but it is the Parish Council's view that the neighbourhood plan still has full weight at this stage because it is in parallel, really. It is of equal status as a development plan to the Mid-Sussex District Plan. Policy DP4 of the Mid-Sussex District Plan shows Cookfield as one of 6 settlements which are identified to sharing a minimum residual requirement of 838 at that point, dwellings. And no sites are allocated in that plan, in the district plan. And similarly, policy DP6, although identifying Cookfield as a category 2 settlement, sets no specific dwelling requirement for Cookfield and doesn't allocate any sites there. So I would like to suggest that the residual requirement mentioned in the district plan of 200 dwellings for Cookfield wasn't part of policy, and it was in any event subject to monitoring and change. And indeed, the residual requirement for all category 2 settlements at this stage in this plan now before you have been revised down from 838 dwellings for category 2 settlements to 198 dwellings. And that, of course, you'll be familiar, sir, is at table 2.4 in policy SA10. Now, this includes windfall sites, so it's not entirely reliant on allocations. And you'll notice also, sir, that not for today's discussion, but that the parish council has made a strong representation on the underestimate of windfalls being made by the district council for the whole of the district over the planned period. So, sir, it's our contention that the neighbourhood plan is still in play and that the policies within it should be given some weight, substantial weight. In particular, I would just want to set out two of those policies for you, which have been in our representations, but just to put more meat on the bones for this discussion. Both policies CNP5 and CNP4 relate to this site. Both raise points of locational principle. And I'll deal with specific landscape and biodiversity impacts later, but just wanted to flag to you, sir, which criterion within those policies the parish council considers the allocation offends. So on policy CP5, which is about protection and enhancing the countryside, criterion B says that proposals should not have detrimental impact on and would enhance areas identified in the Cookfield landscape character assessment as having substantial landscape value. This site we'll get on to be talking about in more detail, but this site, as part of that appraisal, character area 13 is identified in the neighbourhood plan as having substantial landscape sensitivity. So there's a conflict with criterion B of this policy CNP5. Moving to criterion C, it would not have an adverse impact on the landscape setting of Cookfield. And you'll realise, sir, from your site visit, this is an edge of settlement site, providing the rural setting for the northwestern edge of Cookfield. And finally, in this policy, criterion D, it would maintain the distinctive views of the surrounding countryside from public vantage points within and adjacent to the built-up area, in particular, those defined on map 5 of the neighbourhood plan. And the site, again, we'll come on to it in more detail, is within view cone 5 on map 5, this particular allocation site, SA23. It's also notable, sir, that the district council response to your questions lists policy CNP5 under the neighbourhood policies with which the allocation conflicts. Moving now to the policy CNP4, which is concerning protecting and enhancing biodiversity. Again, just highlighting those criteria which the proposal would offend. Firstly, criterion A, protecting species-rich hedgerows and grasslands. Secondly, criterion B, preserving ecological networks. Thirdly, criterion C, protecting trees of arboricultural value. And finally, E, criterion E, providing a net gain in flora and fauna. Your next question relates to conflict with national planning policy. So the landscape of the site has been identified in evidence before you as having qualities typical of this landscape character. So, for example, looking at the national character area, character area 122, the high wheeled, this indicates an intimate, hidden and small scale landscape with glimpses of far-reaching views and small and medium-sized irregularly shaped fields enclosed by a network of hedgerows and woodland. And helpfully so, this is set out in the landscape statement you have from the site proposers at paragraph 5.2. Nevertheless, it's almost a good description of this site under consideration. But this is for the whole of the High Weald National Character Area, not just the High Weald area. So, and also the landscape has substantial landscape sensitivity to development, as agreed by the District Council in their site selection paper. And therefore, to come to the point about the NPPF, paragraph 170, we say, of the NPPF, which states that, and you'll be very familiar with it, that planning policies should contribute to and enhance the natural and local environment by recognising the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside and the wider benefits of trees and woodland. It's the Parish Council's case that SA 23 is in conflict with this paragraph of the NPPF. Now, turning to your 7th question, which is about the impact on the quality of the landscape and ecology of the site and the surrounding area. Deal with those both separately, sir. On landscape, as my statement sets out, evidence prepared for the Cookfield Neighbourhood Plan shows the site to be identified as part of an area of substantial landscape sensitivity. The area is identified in this assessment as having low capacity for development. And indeed, the adopted district plan, policy DP12,
To put you off your style, because your fluent style, but you've now mentioned landscape sensitivity about 4 times, and you mentioned ecological value 3 times. So I've got those 2 points. So can you give me new points in your statements? Because I have read your statements. I just need any new issues you want to bring to my attention.
So I'm just wanting to reinforce the issues concerning the arboricultural study, which talks about the loss of potential mature trees and hedgerows, including TPOs. And I want to draw attention to the landscape statement, which accepts that there would be views of the development site from the north and from the south, and from public rights of way. And
Yeah, that point. Yeah, okay.
Okay. And on principal views, I have drawn attention to the master plan, which has been submitted as reflecting the favourable development layout and so forth for this site, submitted by the proposers of the site, where those views would indeed be blocked of both short-term view, short-length views into the site and long views into the site. So in conclusion, sir, the Parish Council strongly objects to policy SA 23 and consider it is not justified on both landscape and biodiversity grounds, and seeks its deletion as a policy. If, however, so you are minded to accept the principle of some development on this site, the Parish Council seeks to further modify the plan in order to reduce the unacceptable impacts on the landscape and biodiversity, and seeks to reduce the capacity of the site. Just to explain a little further how we've come to the capacity levels for the site. On the landscape assessment, you'll recall Cookfield Landscape Assessment has suggested a low capacity for areas such as this, which should be very small scale. The total site area of 5.75 is reduced to a net developable area of 1.65 hectares on the illustrated master plan submitted. And that evidence is site promoters submitted onto the regulation 19 DPD at paragraph 3.4. There are a lot of landscape requirements for this site, and indeed the proposal is alleged to be a landscape-led scheme. But a net density of 33, looking at the master plan, is a typical suburban development density. And this indeed has all the appearance of a modern cul-de-sac development of uniformly sized dwellings, resulting in a cramped, overdeveloped appearance with poor reference to the rural character. Therefore, sir, one point I wish to emphasise is that in bringing forward the site allocations DPD, the District Council has omitted the requirement in the Regulation 18 plan to concentrate higher density development towards the northern part of the site, i.e. that which is now proposed. Illogically, it appears to us, this wasn't accompanied by a reduction in the dwelling capacity for the site. Unlike other objectors, we do have a capacity in mind for the site, should feel this site to be sound and sustainable. At a net developable area of 1.65 hectares, at a net density of 12 to 20 dwellings per hectare, lower than low for this location, appropriate for this location, that would yield approximately 20 to 30 dwellings. The number of units, therefore, should be amended to 20 to 30 dwellings. So there are other landscape considerations which the Parish Council would wish you to add to this policy, should it be retained in the plan, because it's clear from the submitted revised master plan that more detailed guidance is required within policy SA 23 to get to a point where you have a scheme which is acceptable in landscape and biodiversity terms for this location. Otherwise, I'm sure you have all the other points, and I'm very happy to answer any questions and respond otherwise.
Just one question I have. Thank you for your presentation. One question I do have on the net densities, if it were reduced down to 12 to 20, would that have an impact on the affordable housing yield?
So it certainly would. There would be a reduction in the affordable housing provision locally. There was an assessment made of affordable housing for the neighbourhood plan, whereby much of the provision in Cookfield was coming forward through the recirculation, if you like, of the fairly considerable public housing stock already present within the village. The demand for affordable housing at that stage was not high. One realizes it is ever present, but nevertheless, as part of the balance, to have some housing here would provide some new affordable housing, but at least the proposition would be there to be able to accept comfortably the level of development within the site without offending other aspects of sustainable development.
Thank you very much for that. Do I have anybody else? Yes, Victoria Bullock, welcome.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you very much. My name is Victoria Bullock and I'm from Barton Wilmore, and I'm acting on behalf of Glenby, so that's the site promoter. As you'll be aware, we've agreed a statement of common ground with the council. There's very little between us. We're both in agreement that the site is available, deliverable, and can achieve the 55 units as proposed. We note the late statement by the Parish Council, and we're very grateful for your adjournment, sir, to enable our landscape consultant to attend. That's my colleague Lisa Toyne, and she'll be picking up Mr. Fullwood's comments on landscape. If I just pick up his comments on the neighbourhood plan. So I fear I'm probably going to repeat some comments that have been made earlier. In short, the Cuckfield neighbourhood plan was made in 2014 and was prepared in the context of previous housing requirements. The new Mid Sussex local plan was adopted 4 years later in 2018 and sets a new housing requirement that is to be met. And it includes an express need for further housing allocations to come forward in Cuckfield. And your reference there, sir, is policy DP4. So it's our position that it isn't so much as a conflict with the neighbourhood plan, rather we think we are still in accordance with the main thrust of the neighbourhood plan and the landscape principles set out therein. It's simply a case of housing need has just simply moved on. If you need a reference in terms of the NPPF, it's paragraph 30, which deals with neighbourhood plans being superseded by district plans as they come out. What I suggest that I do is if I pass over to my colleague Lisa Toyne, who can pick up the landscape points, and if anything else comes out of that, I can respond back on that, sir.
That's very helpful. Lisa Toyne, welcome to our assembly.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Lisa Toyne from Baltimore, representing Glenby as well. I will deal with the points that Mr. Ford raised regarding landscape sensitivity and various other points of landscape. First of all, I did not prepare the landscape and visual statement that was submitted in support of SA 23, but I have reviewed it and I concur with its findings. Firstly, I would say that the site is within a landscape character area 13. An extract of that for your information, sir, is included in the landscape statement, so you can appreciate the various landscape characteristics. There's also a very helpful photograph as part of that. The landscape statement is Appendix 5 of document SC 237, and it's in Appendix 4. One thing with reference to the Cuckfield landscape character assessment, Mr. Forward has referred to a paragraph in there which suggests that only where you have a site which has negligible to low or medium capacity, that sort of determines the scale of development. The following paragraph in that assessment, though, goes on to say that the capacity of a landscape can vary across the area. Therefore, it's entirely appropriate for a landscape and visual assessment to be undertaken to look at ways that there may be relative differences in the site and its capacity to develop.
Can I just stop you a minute?
Yeah.
Not your fault, but what you're saying is breaking up. I'm getting about every other word of what you're saying, which is a bit unfortunate if the word is not that I miss out on. So it would be very helpful if we could somehow get a technical solution to this, maybe by just getting the audio rather than the visuals in terms of bandwidth. That may help.
I'm more than happy to do that, sir, if that assists. Thank you. So I was just
back to the start of landscape capacity.
Yes, that's right. I was saying that in the Cuckfield landscape character assessment, there is a paragraph that follows on from how you determine the capacity of the site to absorb development. Goes on to say that and that's at 2.5.9, that the capacity of a landscape can vary across an area, and therefore the starting point, I'd say, to look at whether this site can accommodate development is to undertake a landscape visual appraisal and then assess how development can be best accommodated on that site within the surrounding landscape. Now, with landscape character LCA 13, I acknowledge that it has substantial landscape sensitivity and a moderate value. But what is interesting in terms of its characteristics is that it is noted as including Forsgate House and existing other developments surrounding it in the northern part of the site. But it also notes that despite being on higher ground, these buildings are assimilated into the landscape by significant vegetation. It was also well vegetated with a series of intact hedges, hedgerows, trees and tree groups. In understanding that, the northern part of this landscape character area is already characterised by an element of development set within vegetation. Therefore, in looking at the site, in terms of bringing development forward, we responded to that characteristic. Hence, the northern field of the site is the one that's been identified for development. The vegetation has been retained to provide that framework which is characteristic for absorbing the development. And the southern field has been retained open, which again also reflects the more sloping topography. So it has responded again to the landscape character of the site. This allows for a transition from development to the wider countryside. It accommodates the existing public rights of way. It also provides a real community benefit in terms of open space, amenity and access to the countryside. So notwithstanding the substantial landscape sensitivity of LCA 13, as incurred with the landscape statement, it is possible for development to be accommodated within that landscape character in the way that we set out in SA 23 without detrimental impact on that landscape character area. So it's our position that we are not in conflict with the neighbourhood plan policy CN5 category B, so criteria B. Furthermore, there's a few other points that Mr. Fullwood raises in his statement about also being in conflict with or not following the Sussex Design Guide in terms of creating a positive development edge. I'd just like to refer to that. Mr. Fullwood's referred to it as the Mid-Sussex Design Guide, SPG Principle DG 18, and I think it's actually 16 because it's referred to consultation draft rather than the actually adopted draft, although the wording is no different. That policy, that principle says development should nevertheless be sensitively designed so that it avoids imposing upon the rural edge and existing roads that are characterised by hedgerows and tree belts. This may require additional boundary planting. At the rural edge, low density development will normally be necessary. Again, the proposals as presented for SA 23 do actually respond positively to that principle. Firstly, development is set back from Hanley Lane with vegetation largely retained, except for a short break where to provide access. The existing vegetation is supplemented and enhanced, and therefore the rural character of Hanley Lane will be retained. Development will be set between existing development to the east and the west of the site, and therefore will complement the existing settlement pattern. Where glimpses of the houses may be visible, these would not be out of character considering the settlement edge, location, and the character of views in the immediate locality. So, first of all, there would be little imposition on the rural character of Hanley Road. The southern field would be free from development with a robust vegetated boundary to the development edge and with planting to strengthen the boundaries. And in that way, it would accord with the principles of DG 16, which is to create a positive development edge. It would also mean that there would be very little effect on the setting, landscape setting of cut field, such that it would not be in conflict with policy CPN 5 criterion C. Mr. Fullwood goes on to refer to views from Area 5 and has provided some views on how. I suggest the inspector does have a look at views from because the road is actually quite well vegetated, and yes, there are glimpses, but you do have to, they are sort of through the vegetation and under vegetation. And to help the inspector, there are some views within the landscape statement which will help with that context. Their viewpoints 2, 3 and 4 show the existing character of Henley Lane. The indicative proposals for SA23 allow for the southern field to remain open. And as a result, the views of the countryside from public rights of way that cross that field are retained to the wider landscape for the future. Views from the countryside from these vantage points will therefore be retained within, and they do cross view corridor view 5. There will also be views out to the countryside proposed development. That is the future built up area should development come forward. And both the policy CMP 5 category D, which Mr. Forward refers to views from public vantage points and from the built up areas. So the proposals do allow for continued views out to the countryside from both public rights of way and the built up area. Furthermore, there's a central corridor retained through the development that is shown in the illustrative proposals. And this will maintain glimpses through the development to the wider countryside. This is enhanced because if you refer to that illustrative master plan, there is a footpath connection from Henley Lane through the site to connect with the PRO to the south. That will facilitate people being able to receive views from the upper part of the site, looking out through the centre part of the site to the wider landscape and to the south and beyond. So it will still be publicly accessible, available views of the countryside to the surrounding countryside, as in as required by policy CM5D. And that is that's referred to in the landscape statement paragraph 6.27 in terms of confirming that. As to regarding tree loss, I think the arboriculture report identifies that there are some areas of conflict with the current layout. However, the arboricultural consultant is of the opinion that these can be resolved through minor revision to the layout as more master plan would come forward. At this stage, the plan is a development concept. For an allocation that is entirely suitable for purpose. As a scheme progresses, there are a whole series of iterations in terms of responding to constraints. And these issues can be picked up and resolved as the master plan gets prepared for outline planning application. So, sir, I think that's covered all of Mr. Fowler's points.
Just stay there a minute, if you don't mind. Mr. Forward made a point that more detailed guidance is required. Would you accept that?
I think the landscape visual impact assessment process for the next stage is something that is iterative and helps inform the development of the master plan. So I feel the guidance under landscape considerations that's in SA23 as it stands is sufficient.
Could you just develop it that one step further? In relation to policy SA23, do you think that is sufficient for a local plan in terms of giving the guidance that's necessary?
Yes, for the purpose of a local plan, I do.
Did your colleague Victoria Bullock wish to come in again?
Yes, so just to, I just wanted to pick up one point as well on biodiversity. Mr. Forward maintains that there's a loss of biodiversity Just to flag to you, sir, that in the evidence base submitted as part of the Reg 19, there's an ecological assessment that was undertaken and submitted, and it demonstrates that the habitats on the site actually have a very low ecological value. There's no designated sites of nature conservation or of statutory or non-statutory level. So it's very much the allocation of this site brings the opportunity for biodiversity net gain and ecological improvement, notably to the southern field and to the habitats that remain to the northern field. So it's very much an opportunity for enhancement and protection rather than loss.
Thank you for that. Did Mr. Fullwood want to come in again with any comments? If so, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you very much, sir. Just to respond to some of those points, there is a thought that the other development, the perception of other development in this area means that this is an acceptable site. So I would respectfully say that, as you'll see from it, the site is surrounded, I would say, on 3 sides by countryside. The small-scale development to the east is pretty sporadic and low-key and fairly undetected in the landscape. Cookfield to the south rests in the valley and is not perceived from the northern site, which is undeveloped. On the second point to raise, I think, was the reliance on the retention of hedges and trees. Again, there will be debate, won't there, about whether or not they can survive. My point here is that it is unlikely that minor reshuffles will allow this to happen, and that there are significant TPOs on the site and networks of biodiversity value through hedgerows and so forth, which are now going to be cut through by roads and have more major urban influences against them. Therefore, a slight easing out of the development, as proposed in the capacity modifications by the parish council, would assist that and not rely on this caught into a pint pot type of proposal. On a third point, in terms of determining the capacity, I would say, sir, that yes, there can be some variety. However, overall, this site is more suited to a low density, and in particular, the views through the site. And I just want to draw attention to the point made in the neighbourhood plan. The views from this across this site into the site and beyond to the South Downs start at the public right-of-way which borders or the footpath which borders Hanley Lane on the southern side. And as rightly said, there are glimpses, and I've shown those in photographs attached to my statement, which you will see on site, sir. That is at this time of year. And in the winter, of course, there are much more, the views into the site and the longer views become much more visible. The idea that the central corridor of the site has been left open, or undeveloped, I should say, is not to say that it is open. It is a very mature, wide, hedged and treed belt through the centre of this site, which is prayed in aid of the development, but nevertheless is not something which can be viewed through. Therefore, a new footpath link to the north and a new access road to the north, which will open up the site to views, will not reveal those views as set out in the master plan, and no amount of reshuffling of this master plan would achieve those long distance views as are now available to residents of Cookfield. So again, it's a question of easing the development. To rely, I think, on an LVIA at this stage, you've heard from lots of other sites where LVIAs have been already prepared and there are advanced preparations. This site, as the promoter states, has been in play since 2013, the Cookfield Neighbourhood Plan origins. And yet, here we are faced with their best attempt at a master plan, and it doesn't show any reference at all to those points of concern by the parish council. Respectfully, I would say that we do have a landscape statement, which is very similar to an LVIA, and that shows the erosion of TPOs and hedgerows. That shows a blocked, the master plan shows the erosion of TPOs and hedgerows, blocked protected views from the north, adverse impact on sensitive receptors from public rights of way, inadequate scope for enhancing the planting on the site, and it also shows that no transition really. At the present time, this site, the transitional arrangements are that you cram all the development to the north and the transition is then relied upon to the south. This is not how transition should be with rural areas. A softer edge is certainly that which is suggested in the Mid-Sussex District Design Guide, the principle of which was previously noted. So those are my responses to the site promoters' points, and respectfully, I would conclude that the lower capacity just gives that little bit more breathing space for these things to happen, and that it can't be relied upon a back-ended LVIA to determine that this could become a successful development.
Thank you. Lisa Toyne, you're dealing with a back-ended LVIA. What's your comment?
So we've prepared a landscape statement at the early stages of preparation for the development proposals. We've flagged all the issues and we know what needs to be resolved. The master plan at the moment, as a first iteration, notices most of them. The next stage, an LVIA, a more detailed LVIA and assessment work would allow capacity as shown. With just regarding views of those development in the wider landscape, I would say that already the landscape character assessment that's prepared for LC A13 acknowledges that development immediately adjacent to the site is actually sort of well concealed within the existing landscape, and it's set within a vegetative framework. The development that we're proposing is on exactly the same location. There is a very strong tree belt to the south, and it's surrounded by there's the hedgerow tree belt on the side. It provides a very strong framework within which to absorb that development. So that is very similar to the relationship between landscape and development to the immediate east of the site. And therefore, I think development of this site can be accommodated in the landscape, in keeping with the landscape character.
Thank you for that, Lisa Toyne. I wonder if I could just go back to the council now. And you've heard the arguments for and against. I just wonder if there are any other comments, particularly the point I think that there's more detailed guidance needed.
Right.
Density problem, density issue as well about the 33 dph. Is that too high for this village setting? Mr. Brown.
I think Lisa Toyne needs to turn her microphone off, so just a little bit of noise coming through. Thank you. So I think my overarching response is to say that having heard all the discussion, I want to go back to the basic point of principle. Cuckfield is a category 2 settlement. It is towards the top end of the hierarchy. It is a settlement to which, if you look at the table on page 37 of the plan, it was always intended that a significant part of the need would be directed, an overall minimum requirement of 320, a residual requirement of 200 units. Now, so I fully take on board the point that Mr. Forward makes. Indeed, it's a point that I have made myself more than once. over the last week. That table is not policy. It is not written in stone. We do not have to abide by it, absolutely. But equally so, we have made it very clear that overall distribution formed the council's starting point to the extent that it has been possible to do it. We've sought to meet the overall distribution, if not precise numbers, at least the general pattern of distribution that was indicated there. And on that basis, allocation of a reasonably significant part of the needs towards Cuckfield is something that is plainly in accordance with the district plan. And so that is important because we have looked at all the various deliverable sites around Cuckfield, and you know from the plan itself what it is that has been selected, and that's a comparative exercise. And so the reason why I raise that is because if one just seeks to go back to the points that Mr. Fullwood was making, and one of the things that he talks about is that, well, this is an edge of settlement site. This was in the context of his reference to policies in the neighbourhood plan. Well, so that is absolutely true, but bearing in mind the level of residual requirement that we were seeking to meet in and around Cuckfield, it's highly unlikely that we were ever going to find that within the existing urban area we were necessarily going to be looking at edge settlement sites. That criticism would have been true wherever we sought to meet the need around Cuckfield. Secondly, just again by way of example, Mr. Forward refers to the character area assessment and the description of this particular area. But he immediately and very, very fairly went on to say that, of course, that was a description not just of this particular site, but the whole of the high wheel area. And so it follows it would also have been true of almost any site on the edge of Cuckfield. Necessarily at this stage in the process, if you focus on one individual site, you will be able to find all sorts of reasons why development will have an effect. I understand why, if you are the parish council or local residents, that effect is something they would rather not happen. But what this exercise is involved in doing is meeting needs in the most sustainable, in the least harmful way. And that's the selection process that the council has been through. And it's why ultimately this site has been selected. So in terms of level of detail and overall numbers, well, let me deal with numbers first of all. So you've seen the illustrated master plan that's been produced by the developers. So I'm not going to pretend or suggest that from the council's perspective, we are completely and utterly satisfied with every last element of it. I think the council's position would be there are aspects of it which could certainly be improved. But if one is looking at it not in terms of is this a scheme that we are going to approve here and now, but does this demonstrate that the overall level of development is possible within the site? The answer to that question is yes, not least of all because one of the things which that master plan does demonstrate is that it's possible to put a number of units in and still have, for example, a reasonable buffer at the northern part of the site so that there is separation from the road. There is a buffer that goes right the way around the site, that there is a breathing space between it and the hedgerows, which, as Mr. Forward rightly says, one would seek to protect. And if one is asking, does it demonstrate that those things are possible? The answer is unequivocally yes, it does. So at a density level, we see no reason why there's any need to reduce from what's in the plan. So as far as the level of detail of the policy is required, we would say very much as the developers have done, that the policy sets out the bones. The fact that it's been possible to come up with this master plan within that is, I think, indicative that there is a very clear steer there as to what it is that the council is seeking, what is important. That doesn't mean we couldn't refine and improve the master plan, but that will happen. Our starting point, I think, sir, is that no, there isn't a need for any further detail. And if there is, then some draft wording would be quite a useful thing to contemplate. But at the moment, sir, we're content that the policy says what it needs to.
Thank you for that. I don't know if Charlotte's got any final comments she wants to make on anything.
Oh, sorry. No, I don't think I have. No.
Okay, we've got a site visit list that's in progress, and we'll be reporting back on that next week. We've got the action plan list, which I'm woefully behind, but I'm giving some more bits to that to Charlotte this afternoon.
We'll be crossing off some of the items on that this afternoon, sir, I think.
I'm sorry?
We will be able to cross off some of the items on that this afternoon.
All right. That's about it. Otherwise, those of you who are still around next week, we'll see you. And I think it's Monday, isn't it? We're starting.
It is Monday, sir. Yes. I think.
Listen to me.
This is all, the only participant who's objecting to anything that's happening on Monday, but yeah. It could be a relatively short session on Monday, sir. I don't know.
It could be. Right, I think that's probably it. So I wish you all a good weekend and see some of you next week. Okay, thank you.
And you too, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.